topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. This is Bill Martinez, and we are live. You know, so much is still lingering since the 2020 elections, and this sense of doubt and lack of faith. Can 2024 be a different, a different process where most of America, let's say a majority of America, would have a sense of confidence that we, in fact, experienced a free and fair election? I mean, even to this day, 3 years later than 2020, you've got 61% of the country saying that they doubt the results of the 2020 election. Of course, what we're living with right now exacerbates, I guess, that perception and that opinion. Well, Joe Fried, who was one of our first guests on our TV series, is back with us. Joe is an accountant, and you got to love accountants. You got to love CPAs because they're numbers people. They know when 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2 any longer. They know instinctively, they know by experience when the numbers are being fudged. And you love to have people like this can break down the science, the real science of numbers and the validity of numbers. And Joe did that extensively and quite effectively in his book, Debunked: An Auditor Reviews the 2020 Election and the Lessons Learned. Well, since then, he has now written a new book called How Elections Are Stolen, and here are 23 ways. Identifying election problems is easy. In his last book, as I mentioned, called Debunked, Joe Fried identified many serious problems multiple times. He says the difficult part is finding solutions, ones that have a chance of succeeding. Even simple solutions can be elusive when the wrong people are in charge of our elections. Unfortunately, some state leaders want anything but election integrity. I know that might be hard for some people to understand. I know when I have conversations about this topic, people are still blatantly ignorant, and they choose to be so because there is information, whether it's Joe's book, other documentation, that only raises the suspicion that 2020 was a compromised event, that it wasn't free and fair. As I said, some state leaders still insist on anything but election integrity. What they're concerned about is the outcome, not the process. In his new book, he describes 23 serious problems that undermine the integrity of our elections. Possible solutions are presented, and some which can be implemented fairly easily if you have a want to. Joe Fried, welcome back to the show. Good to have you with us. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thank you so much, Bill, for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Well, it's first of all, congratulations on Debunked. At every turn, after you and I talked, it seemed like everybody wanted to interview you and get the facts, because the fact of the matter is people are still confused and wondering, okay, what happened in 2020, right?
That's true. And if I can talk briefly about what you were talking about the lack of information. Mm-hmm. You and I talked the other day about this a little, about this trial I'm associated with. And I'm not going to name names because it's still going on.
Right.
But it's instructive. And I think your audience needs to hear this. For one of the people who's being accused of wrongdoing on January 6th and in Georgia and so forth, has been trying to get me as a witness for his trial for months. And it's been blocked repeatedly. And just a couple of weeks ago, I went I thought before the judge to give testimony, and it was blocked again. The prosecutors objected. I never got to answer a single question. It was all just objecting to me and my qualifications. So now I have to brag a little because I'll show you how absurd that was.
Mm-hmm.
My audit qualifications are, on paper at least, they're like as good as you can have, because for 28 years, I was authorized by the American Institute of CPAs to peer review, to review the quality of work of other CPA auditors.
Mm-hmm.
I did that probably more than 1,000 times.
Wow.
1,000 times, hundreds of firms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, about the most important thing you can do, because that affects their licensing, whether they will be allowed to continue as audit firms.
Mm-hmm. How many, Joe, real quick, how many other CPAs are traveling in the at the level that you're traveling in, having audited as many other CPAs as you? Would you say you're probably in the top 1% of all CPAs?
I probably, in terms of the numbers, at the top 1/100th of 1%. I mean, I admit I was not doing huge corporations. I was with Ernst & Young for 5 years, where
Right.
we did work on big stuff. But my peer reviews were of primarily smaller CPA firms, audit firms.
Mm-hmm.
But still, in terms of the sheer volume of work and the standards I had to review, I mean, I'm reviewing their quality control standards, the generally accepted audit. And I also did it at the governmental level, where I was reviewing Office of Management and Budget standards and general government accountability, GAO standards, in other words.
Right.
So all I'm trying to say is it's absurd, but they were saying they didn't think I really knew enough about audits that I should challenge.
That you had the credibility. Joe, one other question before you finish the statement, though, is how often were your reports rejected or challenged or negated?
Really, never. I mean, there's always the review you do can be questioned, and there were
Right.
sometimes there'll be a technical peer reviewer who will say, "Did you consider this or did you consider that?" I've never had one out and out rejected ever.
Right.
So that's that. Now, on the election front, not only do I have the 2 books, but I've published in the last 2 years over 25 articles with American Thinker, with the Western Journal, and others. So, but they can't find anything, and I'll tell you why they won't let me talk. Because months ago, I was deposed, and during those hours of deposition, they learned what I was going to say, and they do not want, this is a televised trial, and they do not want it spoken. That's the only reason I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
There's no jury involved. It's just a judge, but they do not want the public to hear it. So that's all I can say. Sometime have me back on, Bill, and when it's all over, maybe I can say a little more about the ins and outs. I can't even watch the trial, by the way, because I'm a potential witness.
Right.
But I've sort of pieced together in my mind what's going on from some of the feedback I've gotten.
Well, it's not only your experience, but we see what's going on, with our government, FBI interference, social media interference. This has been a weaponized process through every 3-letter agency of our government. And as I said, social media, mainstream media, there is a specific agenda and narrative that must be spoken of. If not, you will be canceled, whether we're talking, climate change, whether we're talking the border, the idea of freedom of the press seems to be more and more, Joe Fried, in the rearview mirror.
That is for sure. And I was thinking before I came on your show, I went back, and by the way, if people want to hear the first show, it's on my Substack. You can still listen to that one. You have it too, I'm sure. But
yes.
And because I wanted to see what we covered last time, so I wouldn't be too redundant. Although I imagine you have new people that keep joining your show, so that may be new for some people.
Mhm. Well, if nothing else, Joe, what I expected to do was at least have you give a summary of your first book, which would lead us into why the second book, How Elections Are Stolen. So, for those of you may have missed the first interview, of course, on Joe's Substack, on our site at BillMartinezShow.com, you can download it and watch it at your convenience. It is just as pertinent today as it was then, right, Joe?
That's correct. Well, let me, if you want, I'll get right into it, Bill.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. In Pennsylvania, I'm going to go through as many states as I can. These are the swing states, the critical states. And in Pennsylvania, we talked about Jesse Morgan, the truck driver who, and I'm going to get back into that because that's a very interesting story. But
Yes.
First, I want to talk about something that I failed to talk about the first time. And do you know something? It's maybe the single most important election issue from 2020. So I hope your audience really focuses on this because this is really critical. This one incident I'm about to explain to you really meant that the Pennsylvania election was not certifiable. Here's what it is, the voter deficit. And what is a voter deficit? When you have more ballots than you have voters, that's a voter deficit. And here's what happened on December 28th of 20. This is almost 2 months after the election. Some of the legislators from Pennsylvania, that would be Frank Ryan and Russ Diamond, put out a press release, and it was on behalf of themselves and 13 or 14 other legislators. So this was like the combined view of 15 or 16 Pennsylvania legislators. And they were very concerned because in 9 days they were going to have January 6th and the certification of the national election. And they said, what's going on? Pennsylvania certified its election very early, 3 weeks after the election. All right, the election's November 3rd. On November 24th, that's just 3 weeks later, Pennsylvania certified that Joe Biden won. And they said, now here it is. Now it's December 28th. So it's a month and 4 days later.
Right.
And they're putting out a press release saying we are deeply concerned because it's come to our attention that there's hundreds of thousands more ballots than voters. And they had an exact number, 202,377. 202,377. They didn't say their source. I think I know the source, but apparently they didn't want to say it.
Right.
So anyway, if you think that was baloney, the next day, in a backhanded way, the Secretary of State's office confirmed it. They sent out on the 29th, a day later, they sent out this very nasty response accusing them of spreading misinformation, election conspiracies, of being ignorant and not knowing anything about the way it works. And then they put in this statement. They said, we don't know where you got your information, Mr. Ryan and Mr. Diamond, but we do know that some of our large counties have not yet put their voter information into the registration system. And
well, how could they certify the vote then?
Good question. And then they added this. They said, the important thing is that we got the votes in. That's what counts. We can add and match the voters to the registration system later. Now, This is already two months after the election. They still haven't been able to match them.
Unbelievable.
And yeah, it is unbelievable. Let me explain something, digress for a second here for your viewers. We're talking really the mail-in votes. That's really what we're talking because the people who walk in person usually are pretty honest.
Right.
And they have ID.
Yeah. Well, and usually that one person is attached to a ballot.
Right. You can. It's easy. It's hard to commit fraud in person.
Right.
But what was I going to say? I was going to say. I lost my train of thought. Here's it. I'm glad I remembered. Here's the process how it's supposed to work. And the mail-in ballot, they send in the mail-in ballot. It's in an envelope. It's sealed up. On the outer part of the envelope, in Pennsylvania at least, this is how it works. They scan a barcode, and that puts it into the registration system. Now, why is that important? Well, one, you got to make sure the guy's a legitimate registered voter in Pennsylvania, not in California or somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But also, that's the only way you know that he doesn't vote multiple times, because once you put him in, he can't vote again because you'll see it.
Right.
Okay. But and then once you do that, you open up the envelope and you take out this ballot, which is totally anonymous. Nobody ever in any state ever puts their name directly on the vote. So you don't know. That way, if it's a vote for Joe Biden or a vote for Donald Trump, you won't know that so-and-so voted for Donald Trump or Biden. That's always anonymous.
So the envelope that contained the ballot is separated from the ballot. That's set aside. The ballot's taken differently. So it's no longer identified with the voter. But I thought doesn't the barcode carry on to the ballot itself?
No. And so, Bill, what would happen is this: if you were to do it the way they're doing it, which is to vote first, and then a week later or a month later, scan that. What if it doesn't scan in? It's like at the supermarket, you buy a package of hot dogs and they can't scan it for whatever reason.
Right.
Well, in this case, if it doesn't scan, it might be an illegitimate voter, but you can't go back and retrieve the ballot. You don't know whose ballot that was. It's not associated with that envelope anymore. Once it's taken away, there's no connection anymore. No way to connect it. So,
well, why can't you just pull the ballot out of the count?
Because you don't know which ballot it is. You see, they don't match. If they did that, it wouldn't be anonymous. If you had a ballot envelope with your name on it,
mm-hmm.
and they could later say, "Oh, we see Bill Martinez voted for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump," because we can match that. You see, they don't want any possibility that your vote can be identified, so they deliberately keep it totally anonymous. There's no way to trace a ballot ever into to the identification on the envelope. So this is what I think happened. I'll tell you the truth. This is my theory. Now I'm just talking. What I said so far is factual.
That's right.
I'll tell you what. Before I give you my theory, I better take the next step.
Okay.
After reading those two things, Verity Vote, a very fine analytical firm
mm-hmm.
in Pennsylvania, amazingly good firm. Heather Honey runs it.
Mm-hmm.
I stumbled on one of their reports, and it was amazing. They reported that they had been tracking the voters in Pennsylvania week by week, all the way from October to February of the next year, week by week. And this is how it works. They have a system, their registration system special in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. It's not just all the voters that are registered, but then there's a subcategory, all the voters that are registered who actually voted in the last election. So with that registration system, you can actually see how many people in the week, let's say the last week of October, how mm-hmm. many people voted so far in each of the 67 counties of Pennsylvania, how many voted so far in this election. Then in the first week of November, you can see, well, now how many have voted so far in the election, county by county. They did that county by county. Mm-hmm. And they found out that the final counties that put their voter registration information in, that was Philadelphia and Allegheny and maybe a couple others, mm-hmm. that wasn't until almost February. And you know what, Bill?
Wow.
At that point, they still had 121,000 voter deficit. Now you can say, well, how do I know Verity Vote is right? Well, I'm an auditor and I mm-hmm. verified it.
Right.
I actually asked Heather Honey, not only did I grill her on all aspects, I asked her to send me her January 4th full voter export file, which is a massive file of all millions of people.
Yes.
It's a big file. You have to decompress it. You have to put it on some sort of work paper like Excel. Mm-hmm. You have to sort the columns. But when you do all that, you can see exactly what you've got. And I did that, and I tested 60%, more than 60% mm-hmm. of, what was it? It was a higher number than that of all her counties and all those numbers. It was clean as can be. Her work was solid. I should say their work, because it's more than just Heather. She's got associates that work with her.
Right.
And it was very solid. And I have no reason to think there's anything wrong with her number. Now, later on, maybe
it's amazing, Joe, real quick, just as a, if I might interject, is that when somebody has integrity and they're honest, they give you this information. Anybody else, if you ask for this information, they go pounds flesh, go get a FOIA request or go get a court order. There's no way I'm going to pass that on to you, right?
I'll tell you, their work papers are meticulous, and they put CPA firms to shame. I mean, it was so well done, so tight, no mistakes that I could see. And I can now let me give you my theory. That everything I said so far is factual. Those are just facts, okay? Right. That, in other words, we can say factually, they had not properly, should not have certified when they did on November 24th, the state, that when Frank Ryan and Russ Diamond wrote to them on the 28th of December, they were out of balance. And that even when they finished, they were out of balance. They could not cover those ballots with voters. They did not have enough. That's a fact. Now let me and
these numbers, Joe, these numbers they knew of this discrepancy, but yet on January the 6th, they went to DC and certified these numbers, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why obviously this testimony is important to people. But if they're blocking this testimony, they won't let Verity Vote testify in the particular trial I'm involved in. They won't let me testify. I wonder why, because they don't want to hear this. And then what are they going to say when an auditor who's peer reviewed 1,000 other firms says, wait a minute, this is real. Yes. This is not a theory. Now here is a theory. How did it happen? Maybe the Secretary of State's office wasn't so dishonest to begin with. I think this is what happened. Right after the election, if you recall, Donald Trump was up almost 700,000 votes in Pennsylvania.
Right.
They knew they had just 3 short weeks before their certification in the state of Pennsylvania. And they were probably in a panic. They were thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen if in 3 short weeks, Donald Trump is still up, say, 50,000 votes, or is out of 700,000? It's very easy. So they couldn't take any shit. They just pushed everything through. And I have a feeling when they tried to scan some of those barcodes, for whatever reason, they weren't working. It might have been their computer didn't have enough computer power. It might have been that they had so many mismatches that it was slowing them down. There's a mismatch. It's not working. What's going on? It's freezing the system. But whatever happened, they may have started off with legitimate purposes. I think in the end, they became very dishonest. They were covering it up. Can you imagine the chutzpah to go through your certification and not tell your legislators, hey, guess what? We have a problem here. We're going to certify the election, but we don't know for sure that we have all the voters identified properly. They just thought they could squeak by.
Yeah.
And thanks to Verity Vote, we know that they did this. That's the only reason we know it.
Well, they must have been, again, like you and I talked about before. I think there's a chairman of the board in all this collusion. We don't know who it is.
Yeah.
Maybe you do, but I don't know that we've been able to discern who was in charge, who orchestrated this whole program.
Yeah.
Because to get, 7 states to shut down all about at the same time, for an extended period of time so that they could reset the machines and the votes and the count. And when they shut everything down, here's Trump ahead in these 7 key states. And then by the time they reset the next morning, it's turned upside down on its head. On its face, it's extremely suspicious. Yeah. But, like Dinesh D'Souza said, he told me, Joe, when he went to jail and he met with, his fellow convicts, the everyday mantra was the con never gives up the con. The convict never gives up the con. And this is what's going on here. We have not been able to penetrate the cabal and the whole mechanism of voter fraud in 2020. We just haven't been able to bust it open. We can see all the smoke and look at the facts and the numbers and say they don't add up. But whether it's the Supreme Court or judges or state houses, nobody is willing to take this up because of the power of the administrative state. Let's leave it at that. The deep state has such a stranglehold on these state houses, and they're scared to death to come back and say, hey, there was definitely a problem. There was fraud. And until somebody takes it seriously enough to indict these people, like you said, I mean, this is blatant cheating. This isn't an accident. They did this on purpose because they were told to do this, not only them, but others. And when they're, you got a cabal going and you've got, I don't know, maybe there could have been 1,000 people involved, maybe 100, but they were all on the same team and they all had the same objective. And the objective was to make sure that Joe Biden won and Donald Trump lost. That was the objective, right?
That's right. I don't know who's behind it. I will say one thing, though, that's interesting, Bill. I started to talk about this at the beginning of the show about how they didn't want me to be testifying in public.
Right.
These trials that are coming up in the January 6th trial, the Fannie Willis's thing in Georgia, I think scare them. They're scared that they don't want to hear this information. And so I wonder what they're going to do about that, because, they're going to obviously try to object to everybody.
Of course.
I wasn't, by the way, the only one they were blocking. They blocked it, like from what I gathered, I may be wrong, but it sounds like 13 people were blocked. Right. On this trial. So they just don't want anybody talking about election fraud.
Well, of course, you're blocked. The media is blocked. Partial is with the media. It's partial acceptance because they're part and parcel and joined at the hip with this cabal to keep us all, blindfolded, kept in the dark over it. And this is why you can't have a conversation with a fellow citizen who is now been, indoctrinated to such a degree that they can't even accept any kind of question whatsoever. And you can ask them in the nicest way, in the least offensive way of how did you come to that conclusion? And boy, I'll tell you, the ire gets wound up really quick. And then, they're attacking us for asking a reasonable question. And when I get that kind of response, I just figure, you know what, you're not interested in the truth. And so let's just stop here and move on, and we'll talk about the sunshine and unicorns. Well,
I say thank God for shows like yours, Bill, because thank you for putting this on. I know it takes some courage because you will get pushed back just for having me on.
We've gotten pushed back 3 ways to Sunday. We've been canceled. There are some, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, with the TV show, we have to be careful because YouTube, if they don't agree and they say it violates their, community guidelines or whatever. And what are we violating? All we're trying to do is elevate the intellect of the listener. We want to bless you with some information. We're not coming down from the mountain on high with our hair aglow saying we just talked to God and this is what he told us. No, this is the evidence that has been procured. Now it's up to you. Own your own knowledge. Don't take our word from it. But I also say don't take the word of 8-second sound bites in some of these, media talking heads that want to tell you one thing, but there's nothing to back it up. There's no evidence other than them just telling you, well, Joe, you got to believe this because we say so, right?
That's right. And Bill, I don't think you or I are even proclaiming ever that Trump won necessarily. We're just saying, there should have been a resolution of some of these issues.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying anyway, that there should have been
you can't have people wandering around going, I mean, you had Stacey Abrams for, I think she's still insisting that she should be governor of Georgia. Right. And she lost by 80,000. But it was so outrageous. People just, they didn't give it any credibility whatsoever. No. But I think that if Stacey Abrams had the backing that Joe Biden had, and that had Jeff Kemp had been Governor Kemp had been maligned as badly as Donald Trump had been, I think, she could have some standing and some force behind her. But everything that led up to the 2020 election, with 95% of the media reporting negatively about Donald Trump didn't have a leg to stand on. I mean, he had lots of legs. I mean, here it is. He gets 10 million more votes than he did in 2016. Everywhere you go, you see Trump Pence signs. I traveled through 12 states the month before the election. And Joe, I only saw 3 signs for Biden Harris, 3 signs in all of 12 states as I was traveling, where, comparatively Donald Trump, we're seeing, signs and posters and, his rallies. You had thousands of people attending his rallies, and Joe Biden was lucky to get a dozen people. Right. But we're supposed to believe on its face that Joe Biden was able to get 82 million votes. Well, it seems, excuse me for questioning, the common sense, just matrix here and what we're looking at, the specific benchmarks, right?
Absolutely. And by the way, I live on Lake Erie, about 20 miles east of Cleveland. Now, Cleveland's a very Democrat city. Right. But I'll tell you, I'm in Lake County, and I saw the same thing that you did. It's mostly Trump signs were up and very few Biden. There was very little enthusiasm, it seemed, for Biden, at least in that last election. I think there's less more now, a lot less.
Right.
Right. So,
most of them say, hey, don't look at me. It was my neighbor.
Right. Of course. And I'm surprised because, frankly, if I were trying to put a sign up for Donald Trump, I'd be fearful. I didn't, because for one thing, my wife doesn't even support Donald Trump. Okay. But for another thing, I'd be fearful of having my house trashed or something, because there's a lot of hatred out there.
Exactly. Well, a lot of people were, Joe. I mean, they didn't put bumper stickers. People had bumper stickers. Their cars were keyed. I mean, this is just absurd. But I'll tell you what, it's not, if you keep in mind where that's coming from, it's not coming from the people on the right. The alleged quote unquote deplorables that Hillary Clinton talks about. It wasn't them that was doing the damage. It was the people on the left.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the situation we're in. Well, listen, Bill, do you want me to get into another Pennsylvania issue, or
let's go ahead, because we've got we can do that for maybe another 5 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and talk about how elections are stolen. We're talking with Joe Fried. He's the author of the book How Elections Are Stolen, and he's going to talk about 23 ways. Of course, we're going to have to do it with some rapidity because we have only about 20 or so minutes left. He's also the author of the book Debunked: An Auditor Reviews the 2020 Election and Lessons Learned. If you're serious about understanding what happened, it's up to you. 61% of the country is walking in a haze, wondering what the heck happened. We suspect that there was some shenanigans taking place. This book, Debunked, it may keep you up for a couple nights, but it will settle you, because then you'll realize the truth, something that our government has not been interested in. We spent time impeaching the president, but how much time did we spend, Joe? Even to this day, have we spent any time, any of our taxpayer money, has any of that gone to investigate the 2020 elections on a federal level?
I don't know, not on a federal level, some on the state level. Exactly. And they were, in fact, remember in Wisconsin, they had a special counsel, Mike Gableman.
Right.
Now, look, I have a reason for saying this. Mike Gableman was a former Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Pretty high position, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, I would think so.
And then I think they're term limited there. When he left, they appointed him special counsel to investigate and audit the 2020 election, which he did for months.
Right.
He reached the conclusion that it shouldn't have been certified.
In Wisconsin. Wow.
In the trial I was referring to, where I said that they blocked me because they said I wasn't expert enough. They blocked him too. They said he wasn't expert enough. I mean, who could be more expert than the Chief Justice, who actually was the special counsel investigating it?
Right.
The judge actually reprimanded him and said, and I got this from here, as you might say, after the fact, because I can't listen to the trial.
Mm-hmm.
It told him that he is not allowed to give an opinion on this case because he's not an expert. So this is what we're up against. They're shutting down everybody. And even in the courtrooms, they're shutting them down.
It's amazing, Joe. Here you have somebody of this background and credibility. He's not allowed to say something, but yet every night on television, there's talking heads that all they know about is spouting off the news, but yet they have acceptable credibility.
Yeah, that's the way it is. Well, all right. I digress here. I got to hurry up now. We talked about, I'll just wrap up Pennsylvania with Jesse Morgan again.
Okay.
For the people that didn't hear it the first time. Jesse Morgan, truck driver, drove not just a little truck, but one of those big 18-wheelers. I think it was an 18-wheeler.
Right.
He had a regular route. The route was from Long Island, New York, all the way to the capital of Pennsylvania. That's Harrisburg, down to Lancaster and back. That was his normal route.
Right.
Now, one day he's going, it's October 21st, right before the election. And they're loading up his trailer as they usually do. They put the Lancaster mail in the front, and then they put behind it the Harrisburg mail, which was, he said 95% of the load was Harrisburg.
Right.
And the guy says that's loading it. He says, boy, somebody wants to vote. You got ballots here. So he looks in these, he says 24 big Gaylords. A Gaylord is like a 4x4x4 cube. And in the Gaylords, they have stacks of trays. And each tray can hold a row of envelopes, many rows of envelopes. Okay, so visualize this is stacked with envelopes. He looks at them, and they're all for the election center in Pennsylvania, and they have, some of them have handwritten return addresses. He says, I know they were filled out because the return addresses were all different.
Right.
So anyway, everything's normal. He gets to Harrisburg, and they won't let him unload. And he's waiting for hours, 6 hours. Normally what would happen is he'd get in there, they take the Harrisburg mail off, he'd keep going and then go to Lancaster where they take the Lancaster mail.
Right.
So after 6 hours, he's steamed up. He goes in the building. He asks the expediter, what's going on? She said, you'll have to talk to the postal supervisor. He goes to the postal supervisor, who he said was very rude to him and said, just take your load to Lancaster. And he said, what are you talking about? I'm here in Harrisburg. I've got almost all of my mail is Harrisburg.
Right.
Said, I don't care. Take it to Lancaster. So he said, well, all right, well, give me my paperwork, because you always get paperwork. You know, it tells you what you're taking to where.
Right.
No, I'm not giving you any. So then he says, well, I've been sitting for 6 hours. I want something to show that so that I get late pay.
Yes.
No, I'm not giving you that. So he takes it. He drives off to Lancaster. He has no choice, really. Parks. It's late in the day. He he decouples the trailer from the truck, parks the trailer in the normal spot he parks it in. The next morning he gets back, it's gone. And that was a big story. A lot of people missed it because if you were watching ABC News or something, you never would have heard the story. But if you were watching the free press,
right,
which might be like the Bill Martinez Show,
right,
you would have heard about this story. It was a big story. And that's all we knew for the longest time. I kept trying to get freedom of information. I got baloney answers. One time it could subject law enforcement to harassment because it's a criminal matter. The next time it was trademark and privacy rights. It had nothing to, it was totally bloated.
Now, Joe, where he parked the truck and the cab and that, was it in a secured area?
I think, it was. It was within the post office area.
Oh, it's part of the post office.
It was in the post office in his normal spot.
Right.
I don't know if the truck itself was, because he then drove off and parks the truck somewhere else.
Right.
But anyway, here's what I stumbled on, and I actually put out, they can find it on my Substack, and they can find it on American Thinker. A few months ago, not that long ago, I stumbled on this closing memorandum. I said, what the heck? Was I missing this? It's dated way back in February of 22. I've been writing freedom of information requests and getting no information, and they put a closing memorandum out. Well, the closing, I know why they kept it a secret. They didn't want to post it. They didn't want anybody to see it because it's full of baloney.
Right.
Here's what it says. If we got time, first of all, they acknowledge everything that Jesse Morgan said about his route. He did it. Yes, it's true. There was Harrisburg mail. It did go down to Lancaster. They said the next day they had somebody else without his knowledge take the Harrisburg mail off and drive it back up. They claim they drove it back up to Harrisburg. I'm not sure I buy that, by the way, because the closing memorandum also said there was a printer in the Rochester, New York area that printed 650,000 ballots for Pennsylvania, 200,000 to go to Chester County, which is very close to Lancaster,
right,
and 450,000 to go to Philadelphia County. Now, here's the kicker, Bill. Just listen to this. The printer's claims, this is now a year and a half after the incident, and over 14 months after the investigation, the printer said in the final closing memorandum, it didn't know if it drove those ballots in its trucks or took them to the post office to be mailed. And the post office apparently didn't know either because they left it open. And apparently they had nobody in Philadelphia County or in Chester County that could tell. In other words, there's 4 parties. Any one of those 4 could have said, this is how they came or this is how they were shipped. They left it open, up in the air. And they had some line at the end that said, for the printer, the lawyer for the printer said he would check into it and let them know. This isn't their this is the final word. They're going to let him. He's going to let the inspector general of the post office know when he finds out. A year and a half after this.
Can you say chain of custody?
Well, it's worse than that because, Bill, there is no such thing. You don't have to be an auditor as I am to know that any big contract has to figure out who's in charge of the freight.
Exactly.
It's not just a matter of the cost. It's a matter of the liability. If that truck crashes in between, who loses the ballots? Is it the printer that loses? Who's responsible once the truck leaves the printer? Is it the printer or is it the other people, the people getting it? That has to be, everything has to be in the contract. There's no way that wasn't in the contract. This is all baloney. Yes. And if you order something from Amazon, you have to know if you're going to pay the shipping or if they're going to pay the shipping. All this has to be known. And it tells me some of those ballots might have been in Jesse Morgan's truck after all. And they didn't want to say that.
Did anybody get a chance to take a look at those ballots? Because if they were printed there in Buffalo, was one of the accusations is that these ballots were suspicious and looked like they had likely been printed with a consistent dot on Joe Biden's name, but yet no other dots were administered or were placed on any other candidates down ballot.
I don't think any investigation took place, or if it did, they didn't want to report what they found because I don't know. This has only come to my attention about 4 months ago. I am not aware of anybody doing anything about it. It's inconceivable that they don't know how those got shipped. And so I am very suspicious. I think, remember I said they took them and they claimed they went back from Harrisburg. They took them off of the truck in Harrisburg without telling Jesse, and we shipped them back to Harrisburg. No, maybe they shipped them 20 minutes to the east to Chester County.
Right.
200,000 they were looking for. He thought he had about 200,000. Maybe that's where they went. And do you know what the mainstream media said at the time? I remember 2 or 3 fact checks. They said, oh, this is not possible. In fact, Fox News reported this way too. I can't remember his name, but he said, this is impossible because in Pennsylvania, they have this registration system where every ballot is checked immediately, that they scan in the barcode. Well, as I just told you 20 minutes ago, they didn't do that. They had no idea. And so they were claiming that Jesse Morgan's story was debunked by a facts that didn't exist, by this claim that their system was so tight that they double checked and they triple checked and they knew absolutely that when you voted, there was a voter for every ballot, a ballot for every voter. It was just like that. It was not true.
Well, it goes back to what I've always said: in the absence of fact, opinion rules. And unfortunately, too many opinions replaced facts that were needed. And this is why you've got so many Americans, the majority of the country still believes that the 2020 election was illegitimate and that, President Biden is an illegitimate president. But they don't care because they got what they want. And that's all that matters. That's the problem with power and control. It will step on truth. It will ignore integrity. It ignores the consent of the governed. It ignores all things that have to do with the Constitution. Well, Joe Fried, I can tell you, you've got to come back because we've only got about 5 minutes left. And I don't know that we could even begin to do justice to your new book, How Elections Are Stolen, the 23 Ways. But I'm going to let you just give us a real quick summary and kind of tease the audience because, you will definitely come back as we continue this conversation. And I knew there were going to be updates since we talked, several months back, that there would be more information, and you didn't disappoint me or our audience. So we thank you for coming, loaded for bear. I just wish we had more time to unravel more things.
Thank you, Bill. Thank God there's people like you that are letting me, big mouths like me, talk. I appreciate it. Well, all right, real quick. Here's some of the things in my new book that it's not a huge book. It's small compared to Debunked. It's only about 45% as big, maybe, in terms of words, but it's organized in a different way. This is more like an action book, saying, here's a checklist of problems and a checklist of possible solutions. Some of those solutions are tough, some are easy. First of all, harvesting is a big problem still. Fortunately, you've got this group. Jay Valentine is running this group called Omega for America. Omega, the number 4 America. And they are he's a high-tech guy who's using his something called fractal programming. He claims it is like 1,000 times faster than ordinary programming. It's very fast. They're going in and they're matching registration lists to things like real estate lists and other sources that are very solid, so they can match a voter and an address. And they are finding all sorts of problems. I mean, he says with one stroke of the key, they'll find like 1,000 people at the same post office box, or 1,000 people registered at the same parking lot. Then what they're doing this ahead of the election. They're going to the Secretary of State or Board of Elections, whatever, it varies by state. And he's saying, you've got a problem and you better fix it, because if you don't fix it, then there's going to be blowback after the election. So they're trying
now these guys are apolitical.
Yeah, they are. They're apolitical. They're tech people.
Right.
And if you can get Jay Valentine on your show, by the way, he's a wonderful guy. He's a very busy guy, but Jay Valentine.
Okay.
And by the way, his articles, he's all over the American Thinker. He has written 100 things on that, and it'll give you a flavor for what he's like.
Okay.
He's a very entertaining, very good guy to have to talk to, and very knowledgeable. I mean, he's got knowledge I can only dream of. Okay, so he's a great guy to have. That's one thing. Here's another thing. Now, ballot harvesting. True the Vote was trying their best to. And I think there's a lot of credibility to True the Vote, by the way.
Yes.
That was an attack that was unfounded. Nobody bothered. I looked at multiple, at least 6, 7, 8 fact checks, and not one of them even described the methodology used by True the Vote. That's Greg Phillips and Catherine Engelbrecht.
Right.
That was the foundation for the movie 2000 Mules.
Right.
And if they bothered to listen to the man, he's right on his website explaining the process they use, which was not 1, not 2, but 3 separate sources combined with error reduction processing in the post-production stage. So they had but instead what they would do is they'd call the local professor of something and they say, how accurate is GPS? And they'd say, let me look at my car manual and I'll tell you. I mean, it was not one of them bothered to. How do you fact check somebody and don't even describe the methodology used?
Right.
And just so you know how significant that is, here's another thing they never put in. They didn't want to mention that the most authoritative website you can have for this sort of cell phone stuff is a website called gps.gov. It's the official one for the federal government.
Uh-huh.
And right on that, if you look at accuracy, they have a couple pages on accuracy, GPS.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, there's 3 elements in cell phones. There's GPS, there's Wi-Fi, and then there's the cell phone triangularization.
Mm-hmm.
But the most accurate is the GPS.
GPS, right.
They said that the GPS was typically accurate to 16 feet, not as accurate if there's trees and stuff around.
Mm-hmm.
But, and this is the thing, Bill, if you added a second signal, the 16 feet dropped to centimeters. Centimeters. There's 2.5 of those in an inch. And if it's a stationary object that you're monitoring for a few days, like a Dropbox, for example,
right.
Millimeters. I can't even show that with my fingers. It's they didn't want to bring that up, that how much finer multiple signaling can be.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Well, Joe, we've got to leave it there. Like I said, so much more to talk about. Look forward to having you back, and we'll get deeper into your book, How Elections Are Stolen. Here's 23 Ways. Joe Fried has been our guest, the author of Debunked as well. An auditor reviews the 2020 elections and the lessons learned. Joe is a CPA, and he brings his brilliance to this discussion as it continues, because it should, because that's what happens, Joe. When a lie has been perpetrated, it just nags at us until the truth finally comes out, right?
That's right. And I think in the long run, the truth will come out.
Amen to that. I'm telling you, Joe Fried, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much.
Okay, Godspeed. For more information and to be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and to save our country, check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you his peace. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a great day. Take care.